Hi guys, thank you for coming to this webinar from Wintellect. Today we're going to be looking at 3 ways to automate custom virtual machines on Microsoft Azure. I'm Blaze Stewart, I'm an architect at Wintellect, and I'm also an Azure MVP, so I love to talk about and really do anything related to Microsoft Azure. So let's go ahead and get started and dive right into the content. Now, this is going to be a fairly demo heavy webinar, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at slides, so hopefully that'll be beneficial to you. We will record it so you can go back and when we publish this and revisit the content, and we'll have that available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website, so you can check that out. A little bit about Wintellect and who we are. Wintellect, we are a consulting services company, instructor-led training company, and we do on-demand training through our on-demand training platform we'll call Wintellect Now. Our instructor-led training is where we bring in one of our guys to your company, and we are able to deliver custom tailored training for your needs, be it on whatever stack that you're developing in or whatever technology you might be interested in. And then we also provide consulting services, principally around the Microsoft space. As you can see, we've got a lot of deep partnerships with Microsoft. We're Gold Partner. We also, this slide is actually outdated. We were the IAMCP Partner of the Year for the USA for 2018, as well as the world for 2018. We were also Gold Partner on a number of competencies, and Xamarin Consulting Partner as well. And we have written a number of books. We've have over 30 books that were published by Microsoft Press that have the Wintellect name stamped on them. And this is because some of the authors, the more popular authors, would be Jeff Procyse, John Robbins, and Jeffrey Richter, are the co-founders of Wintellect and have brought it from its inception to what it is today. And some highlights about our company is that we've had we're a Gold Azure partner among other things. Our CEO is the Microsoft Regional Director for Atlanta. We have multiple Microsoft MVPs, including myself. We have multiple ALM Rangers and a number of other things that we integrate with deeply within the Microsoft sphere. So with that in mind, let's talk about Azure, which is really why we're here, and I want to talk about 3 ways to customize Azure VMs. The first one that I want to look at is custom VHDs. Now, a custom VHD is, as it sounds, is a virtual hard disk or virtual hard drive. A VHD is something that you create you on Azure that serves as the stand-in for a hard disk like you would have on a physical machine. So when you create a VM on Azure, you have the virtualized components, CPU, RAM, NIC cards, and the hard drive. Now, and like a hard drive, a physical hard drive, you can take that drive out and plug it into another machine. You can create copies of it. You can clone it. You can use it for all kinds of purposes, such as that. The virtual hard drives do that just like the physical hard drives do. And so what Azure has done is they've given you the ability to take a virtual machine and create an image from that virtual machine. And with that image, you can then create more new virtual machines. So I want to demonstrate how to do this with this one first. This is actually a fairly straightforward process on how to actually use a VHD to create an Azure VM. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to the portal and pull this up, and I'm going to use my dev subscription here, and let me log into my resource group here, and let me see the one that I have created here recently. VM automation, and this one I've already provisioned a virtual machine in this resource group. Now with this virtual machine, I've exposed it publicly, and I've created just a simple website on it. So if I go to this VM, I'll pull that up, and it says hello. My hello from my automation VM, right? So it's what I want to do with this VM is I want to create an image from this VM. So what that allows me to do then is create another identical VM from it. So to do that, I can come over here in the portal, or you can do this from the Azure CLI or PowerShell as well with a command and click capture. And notice that this thing is going to say, before you do this, run this command inside your VM, because this is a Linux VM. It's going to want me to run this command right here. So I'm going to grab that command, but before I do that, I'm going to connect a SSH shell to this guy, And I'm going to do that by grabbing the connect command here and then launching a, connection to this. And I'm actually already logged into this VM, but I'm going to SSH into this guy and then punch in my password and run that command that it provided me in the Azure portal. And this will allow me to essentially make this VM ready for image creation. So click capture again. It's going to give me this command here, and I'm going to capture it using Control C. And then I'm going to come down here to my VM and paste that in, and it's going to ask me, do I want to do this? Yes. Now, once I'm done with this, actually I need to do this as root. So I'm going to do, I forgot to get myself root access, and then I'm going to run this. And once that's done, I can then create the image for this. So it's going to say, do you want to do this? I'm going to say yes, because it has to provide do that deprovisioning of the user in order to generalize this image. I'm going to say I can't use this VM once I've run that command, but once I've generalized the image, I can create another identical VM to this VM. So to do that, I'm going to automatically delete this when I'm done, and I'm going to click just so because it's going to be useless anyway, and I'm going to type the name of the VM, and I'm going to hit create the image, and it's going to run through the process of creating this image. Now this process, depending on the actual nature of the VM, how big it is, what kind of storage you have, among another other, and a lot of other factors involved with Azure, this process can take a few minutes to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this run, and I'm going to look at the next kind of automation that we can do, and then I'm going to come back and revisit this. So it's going to feel like I might be jumping around a little bit, but that's mostly for the sake of time as these VMs are working and the provisioning of this image is working, so that I can get through the content and but also give you some real world, not real world demos, but some working demos of what's going on. So actually, this is actually going fairly quickly here. It looks like it already created it, so I can continue with this. I actually had that went a little faster than I thought it would, so I can continue with this demo. Then I'll do that instead of going back to the deck and just finish it. It says I have discarded changes. What I'm going to do here, though, is I can go over here to the portal and to go to the resource group. That's still deprovisioning it, but the actual image is now created. And as long as that image is created, I should be able to get that. It's not created. There it is. I should be able to create a VM from that image. So once I have that image created, it put it in the same resource group as my VM. I can come over here to this image. Now, once I have this up and running, I can download this VHD if I wanted to, and then take it offline or anything like that. But I can also create a VM from it, and this VM is going to allow me to create a brand new virtual machine. I'm going to use the same resource group that I used before, and I'm going to use a similar size. I could probably just use a DS1v2 here. If it'll let me select it, there it goes. And for that VM, and I'm going to select a password for my name and type in a password, and then create another VM just like I would otherwise do in the Azure portal from one of the Azure Marketplace VMs. But this case, it's using that custom image rather than the actual the stock image from the portal marketplace. So I'm going to expose those ports, and then the rest of this I can just kind of click through because I'm just going to take the defaults of most of this. And once I have all that, I can create my virtual machine, and this will run the VM creation. And we can come back and revisit this in a few minutes, because this will take a few minutes to create, but we can pull that up. So let's go ahead and look at the second kind of automation that we can do with this. Now, what I want to do next for my automation is, let's go back to my deck here, is look at VM script extensions. Now, the virtual hard drive is the case where you need to configure a virtual machine more manually. So the use case for that one is I have some software that requires a lot of manual configuration. I have to edit configuration files, or maybe it's a GUI based configuration tool. I can't do it through automation. So in that case, I have to actually set it all. I'll set up all the software and a manual configuration. And if I want to automate a creation of a VM from that, what I then have to do is essentially take the snapshot of that VM, create an image from it, and then create my automation to essentially clone that image however many times I need to for that. Now, whenever you don't have to configure a virtual machine manually, there is you can do it through automation, you can do it through scripting. VM script extensions come in, and this is essentially a plugin and a VM program that allows me to run a custom script on the virtual machine when it's created. So anytime I go to provision a virtual machine on Microsoft Azure, the VM script extension is something that I can specify as part of that VM creation, whether I'm doing it in the portal, whether I'm doing it through the Azure CLI, whether I'm doing it through ARM templates, or doing it through PowerShell even. I can tell it to use an extension, in this case, virtual machine script extension, and that I can point that to a script that will then execute with that particular machine's creation. And the script needs to be able to run on the machine with the out of the box experience that comes on that VM. So, for instance, if I'm running on Windows, then I need to make sure that my script will run on a bare install of Windows. So you'd be pretty much limited to what's available on that VM when it comes up from a base image from the Azure Marketplace that comes with something like Windows Server 2016 or 2019. Well, that's going to support PowerShell out of the box, so I can run a PowerShell script. And then to that PowerShell script, I can add in additional software components that I might need, or configure the virtual machine, join it to a domain, do anything like that. On Azure VMs with running Linux, then I would need to use something like a shell script to do that. A bash script would be one instance of that. And we did a whole webinar on scripting for Azure a few weeks ago. So if you want to check that out, it would be very relevant to this conversation for VM script extensions. With that in mind, I'm going to do a demo though that's going to look at a VM script extension, but I'm going to be using Linux VM to do that with the Azure portal. But before I do that, let's go back and check on the status of that VM I created just a minute ago and see if it's done creating. So it says my deployment is complete here. So if I go to this resource, this is my VM I just created from my image. I'm going to grab that IP address that I created and do HTTP. And if all goes well, it should be the identical I don't want to Google it, http:// and hello from my automation VM. That's identical to the VM I just had before, but this one's not going to respond. It's no longer available. But my new VM on this new IP address is the same. It's a clone of that other VM. It's just on a new endpoint. So I created a new VM from an image I took from that other VM, and I could create a third or fourth or fifth, or sixth VM from that same image, and they would all essentially be the same thing, but it's just a different endpoint for that matter. So that was that demo right there. So my first demo is finished. Let's go on to this VM script extension demo here. So for this one, I'm going to go over to my Azure resources and go back to my VM automation resource group. And I'm going to add just a marketplace VM here. I'm going to go Ubuntu and use Ubuntu here. Now, I can do this in the portal. Like I said, I can do it through ARM templates as well, or any other type of way of creating a virtual machine on Azure. I'm just using I'm using the Azure portal for just for convenience sake and a lot of things like that. So I'm going to choose this DS1 VM for this one again, and I'm going to use this same username and password you've been using before. And now the configuration for this, I'm going to install something on this VM that is fairly involved installation. So I'm going to select premium SSDs, and I'm going to allow port 44380 SSH and SSH on this guy. And then I'm going to go into the management, let's just take the defaults on this. Now it's on this advanced tab, I have some options here. So with I have CloudOnit, which we're going to look at in a moment, but I also have extensions here. Now, if I come into extensions, I click on this, it's going to open up a blade here where I can install a lot of other additional software. Now, you can install backup software, you can install security software extensions, and so on that are available through this extension. Um, Resource here, but I'm going to select this custom script for Linux right here. And this is the one that allows me to create a custom script extension for this particular VM. Now, to run this, I'm going to use a file that I have on my local drive here. Um, I'm going to go d:/source, and I'm going to go back to cloud-init, and I have a script here called openvm .sh. And what this script does is it actually installs it installs OpenVPN on my virtual machine. And if you're not familiar with what OpenVPN is, it's an open source VM that will allow me to use a Azure virtual machine as a VPN concentrator, similar to the way that like a lot of those privacy VPNs work. Except this one, I'm managing it, I'm creating myself on Azure, and I'm giving away my password there. So, but the point is that I can install this using a script. Now I have the script available on GitHub, and that's why I'm using it, because what this is going to do is pull up it's going to install a bunch of resources on this VM. So once I have that set up and got created, everything is plugged in, ready to go. I plugged in the command. I can go next. I can then go to review and create, and then create this virtual machine, and come back to this when it's done. So this will take several minutes to deploy because it's deploying the VM, but the script itself will take a little bit longer to run. But to show you this script on GitHub, to show you what it looks like, I'm going to go to my GitHub repo right here and show you what this looks like. And this is actually this script right here. And what this does is it's just running some apt commands inside of Linux. And it's running some apt commands inside of Linux. It's configuring some config files and installing a bunch of software, and then configuring OpenVPN by way of script. So you can see here that it's doing a lot of different things under the hood that are about configuring this VM to do exactly what I want it to, and that's where you would get the actual VM script extension to do all this configuration for you, because I can automate everything through a script. This makes a good candidate for using a VM script extension. Now notice that it's pulling stuff from GitHub right here. It's pulling some of the scripts that will be downloaded and installed as admin scripts for this guy that'll be served through an admin UI portal, as well as configuring IP tables on this guy so that the routing gets configured. It's setting up a bunch of firewall rules on this server, a number of other things like that. It's just a lot of different kinds of configurations that go into making this software work well on an Azure VM. And once this VM creates, we should be able to see it become available here, and we can kind of watch the progress of it as it creates. But we have this currently deploying right here on the VM3. If we look at the operation details, it's going to be telling me it's running the script extension and so on inside of this VM. So let's let this finish, and let's look at the last option that is going to be running on there. So it just started running that script, which is using CloudOnit. And we'll revisit this VM in just a minute for the sake of time. I'm going to go back to the deck though and look at the third option here, which is using something called CloudOnit. Now, CloudOnit is a newer way of doing provisioning of virtual machines, and it's an open standard that supports multiple clouds. So this is not particular to Azure. So CloudOnit works on AWS, Google Compute. It can work on premise, and most all the popular clouds support it and support it well. So our use case here for CloudOnit is to provision a virtual machine on Azure that is using an open standard versus something like Azure VM extensions, which is more specific to Azure, although the script itself is more particular to the actual virtual machine distro that you're running. The power of CloudOnit is that it's an open standard and it supports multiple clouds. The downside to it is it only supports Linux VMs, so you couldn't use CloudOnit on Windows for that matter. But what it does is it has a lot of rich plugins that support customizing VMs independent of the distro. And what that means is that I can build a CloudOnit script that will generally work well with multiple distros. So if I build it for if I build it for Ubuntu, then it's likely going to work well for Debian or Red Hat even though they're using different package managers to get those resources onto the VM. That if you use Red Hat, you have to use yum install. If you use a Debian base like Ubuntu or um, or Debian itself or one of the other distros based on that, you have to use apt. And those commands are specific to the distro, but CloudInit just allows you to install packages on the actual distro, and that will abstract away the actual need for knowing which of the distros I'm working on. So given that this is widely supported by clouds, multiple clouds, and it's more distro independent than a given script, sometimes this will become an option for software where you're trying to target multiple environments and multiple clouds regardless of the distro and regardless of the clouds. This is just one of those abstractions that's given to do that. So deciding whether to use scripting, CloudOnit, or deciding to use a VM script extension is something of an art. And generally, I end up preferring the scripting extensions because I tend to favor Debian-based distros for most of the stuff I'd build, but maybe you're not, and this would be a useful tool for doing that. So I'm going to start the demo of this one now on CloudOnit. I do want to look at the CloudOnit website just to turn you on to this guy. Init, and you just simply Google it, and you can go to read the docs, and this will give you a idea of the overview of the actual features and functionality that this guy has into CloudInit, and then there's also cloudinit.io, which gives you there's some additional resources here that you can use for provisioning your virtual machines under CloudOnit, and so you can see why you can see the operating systems that are supported and the source code for it, and all of how to use it, a number of other things on CloudOnit as well. So let's go back to the Azure portal here, and it looks like my other one completed. We'll look at this one in just a moment as soon as I initiate the launch of my other my CloudOnit demo here. I'm going to add in yet another virtual machine into the same resource group. Let's come back here and just select my resource group and hit add there. It'll pick the right subscription and the right resource group for me rather than having to remember which subscription I'm using for all these demos. And I'm going to create another Ubuntu VM, and I'm going to call this one VM4. I think it's the fourth VM I created. And I'm going to use the same size I used for the other one, the DS1v2. And I'm going to use password authentication and create this virtual machine here. And I'm going to take most of the default on this until I get to, let's go back to networking here and open up some ports, because I'm going to install a web server on this guy and then come over here to advanced. Now, you notice here that I have this text box for CloudOnit. Now, if you are doing this through a more of a scripting environment, such as Azure CLI or some other supported mechanism, you would need to have a file that you would point to. But this one, I need to copy and paste the actual CloudOnit into this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and then I'm going to get the source code for this that I've already built so I can walk you through it. I'm going to show you what this looks like first, and then I'll copy and paste it into um, that text box. So basically what this is going to do, this is a very basic example, but what it will do is install a package, in this case Nginx, and this is a YAML file. And what it will do is once it installs the package, it's going to then run a command. So I can run a command with this particular um, CloudOnit, and what it's going to do is run a function here. Now this says this notation cell tells it to run a function, so I'm going to say shell the dash c, and then the command that I want it to run is actually this command right here, this function right here that is using cat to write some kind of HTML out to a file. In this case, the index.html of in the root for my web server. So www.html index is the root, and so what this should do is install Nginx and create a home page. This is generally what this script is doing. So let's go ahead and grab the CloudOnit here and paste it into that box there, and then go through each of these steps and then hit create. And this one will then start the deployment of the actual script. And let's go ahead and let this run. And let's go back and revisit the script I did a few moments ago, where we were looking at the VM script extension, which was to install that OpenVPN server on my VM. So let's go back to my VM automation here and look at VM3 that I've already created, which is right here. Now, this one I don't have a host name for, but if I go to HTTP I'm going to get an SSL error when I run this, and that's expected. It's because it generated a self-signed certificate. But I'm going to proceed anyway, and it's going to ask me to log in, and I'm going to put in that super secret password, uh, uh, password one that I supplied when I ran the script, and then that's going to bring me to the admin page for this particular demo here. And this script here is not actually the one I showed you. It was downloaded by the script I showed you. So the install script downloaded this from my GitHub repo, and now it's running as a web app that is serving up a very basic web page, and that allows me to create the configuration files for an OpenVPN client that I can then download and use with my OpenVPN client to connect to this OpenVPN server. And this is just to show you that it is up and running. So let's go back and look at our third deployment here, which is using the actual VM that I created using CloudOnit. Now, if I go to the resource here, um, this VM is already deployed. That's that's my VM3. Let's go back over here and look at VM4 and see how it's doing as far as the automation is concerned. And it looks like it's finished now. And if I go into this one, I should be able to pull up another endpoint and see that um, this is a demo of CloudOnit. So that's exactly what I expected it to do when I ran that CloudOnit demo. Now, there's one other thing I do want to consider with this, and that is the integration of these kinds of scripts with something like ARM templates. Now, if you're not familiar with ARM templates, these are Azure Resource Manager templates that allow us to create resources on Microsoft Azure that will create things like virtual machines, VNets, NICs, network interface cards, virtual hard drives, and a lot of other integrations that you can do with these. Now, this particular ARM template I'm looking at allows me to deploy that exact same CloudOnit, that's not CloudOnit, that VM script extension that we just pulled up when we looked at the OpenVPN server. And I want to show you this because this same script can be used in another context. In this case, I can create the VM, the Azure Resource Manager template, but here I can actually, I'm going to show you where I'm using the script extension right here. So notice here, instead of doing it in the portal, I have this block here that defines the template. And this is a VM script extension that is called, OpenVPN setup, and it's pulling that script from that HTTP endpoint, that actual GitHub repo that I showed you a moment ago, and it's actually building the command to execute that um, right here by calling out to open that calling that script. So it's actually passing in the same two parameters that I gave the portal whenever I ran this exact same script. And this one actually has more, I've supplied more parameters to it because this one is actually more complete than the one I just ran. So if I actually ran this with this, I can go back to the home page and I click this deploy to Azure button here, and it will actually read that template from my GitHub repo, and I can actually supply some parameters for it. Um, I can do my super admin pass. It won't let me use that. I can use Blaze and then supply my super secret password 1 to this guy, and I can do Blaze VPN1, and it's going to want me to do a more robust password than that. That's better. And then actually deploy that same VM script extension. I need to select a resource group here. Let's put it in the same one, and then there we go. And that will actually run the same VM script extension using this time, instead of using the portal, it's using an Azure Resource Manager template, an ARM template, to do essentially the exact same thing. And that is how you can integrate it with using Azure Resource Manager templates along with VM script extensions to get a more full-blown experience that you would otherwise get from those scripts that you could do in the portal or through the Azure CLI as well. So that is pretty much the short and the end of this particular demo, the three demos that we have. I do want to open it up to questions for you. So if you have any questions, please pose those into the question box over here, and I will try my best to answer anything that you might have. Um, the question is, am I using ARM templates um, with am I using CloudOnit with ARM templates, or are they exclusive? No, they're not exclusive. They actually will. I believe they integrate with one another to allow you to. You can use ARM templates with CloudOnit in order to get a full blown experience for it. But what you would need to do first is first deploy your ARM template, and then point to that as a um, point to that that cloud-init script once from your ARM template to initiate that cloud-init once that gets going. In fact, Winlike published an article on that here not too long ago by Ken Muse, who is one of our guys that does a lot of DevOps, that has an article on how to use ARM templates with CloudOnit. So if you want to check that out, it's right here at winlock.com/ARM templates and CloudOnit right there. So um, are there any? If there's no other questions, then I think that going back to the first demo, is there a way to create a generalized image without being destructive to the original VM? Um, yes, it's not. Uh, yes, there is. The way to do that is there is a couple of things you can do with um, it's what is it called? I'm drawing a blank here. It's called desired state configuration or DSC, which is a tool that allows you to generalize VMs without having to destroy it. Technically, you don't have to do that on the VM to destroy the VM. Um, like if I like for instance in that VM I just did on whenever I ran that command, I could have created an image from that VM and not destroyed the VM. It might have deallocated the VM, but it what that generalization does is it removes the user so that the recreation of that user is possible. And so if I'm okay with just having that user baked in to that particular virtual machine, and I want to just provision the user as a part of that image rather than being able to recreate the user, then I wouldn't have to redestroy the original VM. In fact, I've done that on a couple of occasions where I took a snapshot without actually run that command to keep the original VM around, and that's also how Azure will do Azure backups too. In the background. So what it does is if you're using something like Azure Site Recovery, it's basically using the same technology. It's just doing an image of that virtual machine and allows you to restore from that image. And also, it is possible to do a bring your own operating system scenario as well, such that if you are provisioning some other um, operating system, which I've done in the past, is to take something like a some take some distro of Linux or some version of say like BSD and build an image on your local dev box, and then take that and that image may or may not be generalized at all. Or you could generalize it more manually and then take that, upload it to Azure Blob Storage, and then from that you can then create a snapshot I'm sorry, create a VHD from image of that from that uploaded virtual hard drive and get the same experience as you would with taking a snapshot of a VM on Azure. So it gives you kind of both. There's a lot of ways to get those images on Azure, and no, so that's kind of a long answer to saying no, you don't have to be destructive to the original VM. There's a couple of ways you can do that, either by bringing your own operating system, not choosing to run that command, or just doing a simple backup and then creating a VM from that as well. There's several paths that you could do with that in mind. So I hope that answers your question there. So are there any other questions related to any of these technologies on Azure? Third one here. Um, There's a lot of great info on this presentation. Would it be possible to rush again? Yes, we're gonna put this on our Azure. We're gonna put this on our website, and we'll have that available for viewing in the future. And it'll also be on our Azure on our YouTube channel as well, so you can check it out there. So we'll have one of those channels. You can go out to either one of those. We're on YouTube at Winlock Now, and then on our website, winlocknow.com, we'll have this webinar as well as all our past webinars available for viewing. So if you want to go out there and check out the one that we did on on Azure, I'm sorry, on virtual machine Linux scripting, it plays into a lot of the same content that we're presenting here in this webinar. And we also did an intro to Linux one too, if you're not familiar with Linux. So any other questions? Well, if that's okay, of the various paths, of the various methods, which is the fastest path? Well, that's a it depends question. I'm not fast is relative to what you're trying to do. So if my configuration, for instance, if I was doing a Windows VM and I had a lot of software to install, say I was doing a rather intricate configuration of say something like SQL Server and I had a very specific script to install SQL Server, and I had a configuration of that guy, and I had a lot going on inside that. Um, the the speed of that to do that all through scripting might take a long time, so it might be faster just to create a image for that and just create clones of that image. The trade-off for doing images in that case would be um, the ability to maintain the image. So every time I wanted a new version of that, I'd actually have to create a new version of that image. But that might for to answer the question, for large complex setups, sometimes images are faster. But for simple setups or from something that's kind of more in the middle or something that doesn't require um, a lot of like data restoration and things like that, the VMs, the script extensions of the CloudOnit might be a better approach. Now, which one of those between CloudOnit and VM script extensions, that's kind of six one way, half dozen another, because they're basically two ways to kind of do the same thing through scripting. So it's not an either or there. It's both of those are just basically two ways of doing the very kind of the similar task of essentially automating through a script the provisioning of a virtual machine, installation, and configuration of software. So depending on the situation, depends on which one of those I would use. Um, Question here says, if I copy Windows VM, how can I handle the licensing on the new VM? Microsoft doesn't really police the licensing on those, so they're not going to sit there and sit there going to the licensing on that, if you were to apply like a site license, you could definitely create images of that. If you didn't have a site license for your Windows VMs, then you'd need to make sure that you have a license for that copy of Windows. Now, as I understand it, really the only license you need is for the VM as it's running. So if you created a VM image, destroyed the original VM, and then had the image itself, and created three copies of that, you just need three licenses for those three VMs that are running. It could still be using the same key per se, as long as you had paid for three licenses on the to use that virtual machine. So that's basically how you would handle the licensing on that. So you want to look at, but and it also comes down to really what kind of license you have for Windows. If you have a site license or essentially an enterprise-wide license that you can use widely, you get 10,000 installs of Windows or what have you. You can definitely use that for that. Now. In Azure, if you use a marketplace VM, in other words, I use a VM script extension for PowerShell, and I use an Azure VM on from the marketplace, then as part of that Azure VM, I am actually paying my utilization of the VM. I'm actually paying for a license, so I'm being billed as a build for the license in a conjunction to my usage of the Azure CPU and memory and storage as well. So it's baked into the cost of that VM on Azure if you use a marketplace VM. But if you bring your own license, then you're not going to be charged with a license, but you have to tell Microsoft, you have to click a box and say, I have a license for this VM on Azure. So basically it's depending on how you provision that VM. But you just basically need to make sure that you at least have the license, you paid for a license for Windows. So I hope that answers the question there. Uh, um, any other questions related to scripting on any one of these three technologies? Well, if there's no further questions, I will call this a wrap. Thank you guys for attending this session, and we'll be posting this video, like I said, on our webpage, on our YouTube channel, and we'll be having more Wintelect webinars in the future related to Azure-related technologies, data, AI, development, and so on. So look forward to seeing you on a future Wintelect webinar.